The big fights keep coming on DAZN, and we have another big one, August 3rd from LA. Terence Crawford bidding to become a full-weight world champion when he takes on Israil Madrimov, and we're about to discuss it here with a wonderful collective of talent. Former IBF middleweight champion Darren Barker, former WBO heavyweight champion Joseph Parker, the trainer of all trainers Ben Davison, and the great Chris Mannix. You're waiting to see what I was going to say.
I had no idea where you were going to go with that.
The great's good. The great Chris Mannix.
The great works for me.
The great Chris Mannix is good. Terence Crawford, arguably a pound for pound top 2, top 3. Very quickly, where do we have him in those pound for pound rankings? You know, I'm obsessed with that. Where is he for you?
I'm going
2.
Yeah, I just think the win over Spence was huge. Massive name. It had been bubbling for a long time. So for me, personally, and I'm a little biased because he's one of my favourite, I have him in at number 2.
Do fighters care a lot about pound for pound rankings? I feel like we in the boxing media care so much. Do fighters care a lot about it?
I mean, fighters that are involved in it, yeah. I would have to say, I agree, probably number 2.
Number 2?
Yeah.
Usyk number 1, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Yeah? Ben?
Probably number 3 for me. I think the win over Spence is a phenomenal win, but I just think Canelo's got such a backlog of those wins. I'd probably still have him either 1 or 2.
Oh, interesting. I think we all thought you was going to maybe chuck Inoue.
Inoue, yeah.
Canelo. Okay, Chris?
I've got him at number 2, but there's more fluidity in these pound for pound rankings at the top now than I think there ever has been before. Because right now I've got Usyk at number 1, but if Crawford beats Madrimov, I'm probably springboarding him back up to number 1. If Inoue moves up to 126 and unifies titles there in his first fight, I might jump him up all the way to number 1. I can't remember a time where in 1 year you could see the top of the pound for pound list change as often as it could right now.
Okay. Just how big a test is this for Crawford moving up to 154 to take on someone like a Madrimov?
It is a test. I mean, he's the bigger man. He's a very good fighter. He's in your face. There's a lot of pressure. He's dangerous. He's confident. And it is a test. You know, the question is how much motivation does Crawford have left? You know, he's achieved so much. I believe there's plenty more. I think the Spence fight that we've mentioned was as close as a masterclass as can be. You know, he's so relaxed. He just gets into his groove. The counter right, the counter left, so impressive. So he's going to have to stay switched on for every second of every round, Madrimov.
Yeah, dangerous as it can get at 154 pounds. I mean, there are other guys out there that I guess you could maybe chuck into this fold as well. But in terms of the challenge at 154, he is picking one of the best, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think you could make the argument that he's taking on the best. It's an argument that certainly, you know, fans of Sebastian Fundora or Tim Tszyu or Jermell Charlo could make as well. But, you know, Madrimov is a decorated amateur. He's got 10 wins under his belt. His last performance was his best performance. He looked brilliant in that fight. Not been out in that Indio, California gym where all these Uzbeki fighters are landing nowadays. MJ Akhmadaliev, Bektamir Melikuziev, see Shakram Giasov out in that gym. Like, these guys work hard. Like, these guys are disciplined, they're focused. So this, I think, is, you know, besides this, what we thought the Spence fight was going to be, I would look at this as being maybe the toughest test of Terence Crawford's career.
Ben, you and Lee Wiley and your team love breaking down fighters, right? You do it round by round, you do it shot by shot sometimes. When you look at Crawford and try to break him down, just how special a fighter is Terence Crawford?
Do you know what's funny is I think he's actually still improving, and I think that some of the things that people would associate as his strengths, like the switch hitting and things like that, he's actually taken parts of that out of his game, and I think it's worked for him. I thought that if he was going to get pushed back by Spence, it'd be because of the constantly switching stances. In between those moments, he'd allow Spence to be able to press him and push him back. By him actually being a little bit more disciplined, staying in one stance is allowing him to start to do that. And yeah, I think he's actually still improving.
That's a scary thought. Joseph, it is a scary thought, isn't it?
The stance though, like, it's quite incredible that he can fight both ways a whole entire fight. Like, I remember trying to switch it up in training camp, and I felt like an amateur. You know? So it's quite incredible that he can do that.
You know, after the Errol Spence win, it was the first time I've seen anyone really throw a fighter of this generation at Floyd Mayweather. Like, could Crawford have beaten Floyd Mayweather? How are you seeing that fight play out?
It's hard to say because you're talking probably about Crawford at 140 or 147, where I think Floyd's best years were 130, 135, when he had was it 135 when he just beat down Diego Corrales. Like that was his signature win at that point of his career. I think Crawford at 147 could have beaten Floyd Mayweather. But I don't think Floyd was at his very best at that weight class. I think Crawford, as we saw in his last fight, once he grew into that welterweight division, became as strong as he was at that weight, I think he would have found a way to beat Floyd.
Yeah, agreed, especially with the welterweight.
I can't wait for the comment section.
But the reverse, let's not forget, Crawford won his first title against Ricky Burns at 135. So he started at that weight class. I think Floyd at that weight would have cleaned his clock because I think Floyd was just a different fighter. He was a much more defensive fighter as he got a little bit older and progressed in his career. Floyd, before he was money, when he was pretty boy, like he was knocking guys down and knocking them out. Like he was aggressive. And I think that version of Floyd, 135 version of Crawford, would have had a lot of problems with.
147 Crawford, 147 Floyd.
What you said.
You got to think Crawford as well has stopped his last 11. Offensively, when he gets in his groove, he's very busy. I always thought Sugar Ray Leonard.
But none of them as good defensively as Floyd.
Yeah, not many were.
I disagree on this. I think Floyd had, again, going back, I mentioned the Canelo thing with the pound for pound. I think Floyd's signature wins, if you lined them up and lined up Crawford's signature wins, I think you'd look back and go, actually, there's quite a bit of a difference there.
Let me ask you this. Would you have thought differently? Like, Crawford didn't have much competition at 35, only there a short period of time. 140, he cleaned out quickly. It wasn't a great weight class. He was at 147, and he beats Jeff Horn. That was 7-8 fights ago, whatever that was. And then he's looking around for something. Meanwhile, Spence got the big fights because Spence at the time was better, more politically aligned. Would you have a different opinion on that if it was Crawford that went through Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia and all the guys Spence went through and then beat Spence at the very end?
I think the argument would then be different. I think you might then look at the resume and go, actually, it's a little bit more comparable. And I think Crawford is still developing, as I said, but I think Floyd is a lot more layered. I think he's a lot more conscious of what he's doing. Yeah.
The fact that it's even a discussion shows how good Crawford is.
You know what they share too? They both live the life, man. Yeah. Like the reason that Crawford is still able to be elite in his mid to late 30s is that doesn't drink, doesn't smoke. He's at the gym every single day. Like there are no outside distractions. Say what you want about Floyd and some of the craziness we saw in his career, but he was as focused and as disciplined as any fighter was of his generation.
And that's why he's still able to still improve. And Joe mentioned that earlier. He loves it. I love that. I love when the boxers are in love with it. They absolutely love it. Because I think so many boxers retire and then look at it and go, oh, I actually enjoyed that more than I realised. And I think there's nothing more beautiful than being in the moment and knowing how much I love it and just maximising it.
All right, let's. The elephant in the room is the super fight for Terence Crawford. This one's a big one, but for the last couple of months, I mean, this talk about Crawford moving up to 168 to take on Canelo isn't leaving the room. People want to have that discussion. Ben puts his head down, thinking, "Okay, we're talking about a double weight jump here. It's a lot. It's a lot for a fighter to do. Could it happen? Do you think it will happen if he gets past Madrimov?"
Tough ask, that one. Jumping up 2 weight divisions. What do you think?
Sign me up. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I don't care. I love this fantasy fight thing. I love the fact that there is a potential that we could see that fight. I'm all for it. I mean, you'll have cross opinions, I believe. And honestly, I give Crawford a real chance because the way he moves, the way he counters, he's busier than Canelo. I think Canelo coming down in weights, his work rate would have to rise. He'd have to be busier. Shades of the old Canelo. I think where he's gone through the weights, he's just slowed things down a little bit. But when you're fighting a guy that's naturally smaller than you and works well with a good tempo, you're going to have to try and match that. So I give him a real chance.
Every time I see a fighter go up against Canelo, they say a lot of stuff, they point to how they fought previously, and they fight completely different. Because when you're in the ring with that guy, who even at this stage of his career still counterpunches like a bull, still has incredible speed, you aren't the same fighter anymore. So if you're going to sit there and tell me that the version of Terence Crawford that we saw against Errol Spence, the offensive-oriented guy that took the fight to Spence and beat him down, is going to be that same guy against Canelo, yeah, I'd give him a chance because that's a great fighter. But guys have a tendency, and we've called a lot of Canelo fights over the last 10 years. They have a tendency, except for like Gennady Golovkin, like when they get in the ring with Canelo, to be more defensive, to not be willing to engage quite as much. So I would still favor Canelo for that sole reason.
I just don't see what Crawford can do that Canelo what obstacle Crawford.
The southpaw styles, perhaps. No, not the greatest against southpaws.
The fact that we're even discussing it tells you how good Terence Crawford is. He started at 135 pounds. We're talking about him boxing the best 168 pounder. So I'd like to get that across because I'm not. At the minute we're comparing Terence Crawford to Floyd Mayweather and Canelo Alvarez.
Incredible.
Are we dismissing the possibility that Madrimov could sleep him? Like, Madrimov can punch. Like, he can really crack. And look, when I saw them face to face in New York a few weeks back, the size, there really wasn't much of a size difference. In fact, Crawford looked a little bit bigger in that moment, I'm sure.
I always check the trainers now with these fighters, though. You fighters are tricky with your soles, those 2-inch soles.
Yeah, you never know. So I don't think size is going to be a big factor there. But this is in his prime, incredibly skilled, really strong junior middleweight. And look, when you make the jump, I know that it's not a huge amount of weight, but your first fight at a new weight class, you're a little different. It takes you a minute to adjust that. And he's going to be adjusting to a new weight class up against a guy who might be the best in that weight class. So I love talking about Crawford versus Canelo, Crawford versus everybody else, but I think this Madrimov fight, again, is going to be the toughest fight of his career. I'm thinking back at all the big fights he's been in. I think this is going to be the toughest one when I look back on all of them.
I do want to talk about the heavyweights because there's a heavyweight fight on there which I know you'll be interested in. But I want to get everyone's predictions on the Crawford and Madrimov. I'll start with you. How do you think that fight plays out?
It's a tough challenge, like Chris said, but I stick with Crawford.
Yeah? Knockout or points?
Points.
I think Crawford will go points for the first time in 12 fights and get the W. Unanimous points decision.
That might make him consider things to 168 then. If you're struggling with the guys to get him out 154, 168 is a different beast.
I'm going to take Crawford's split decision.
Ooh.
I think it's going to be an incredibly competitive fight. I just think Madrimov is the real deal. I think he's a real fighter.
Okay.
I think depending on how Madrimov approaches the fight, I think if he looks to physically impose himself and be quite aggressive, I think it could look quite similar to the Sean Porter fight early on. But I think...
Which was competitive.
Yeah, it was competitive, but I think Crawford will then start to make him pay for, some of the things and these angles and the footwork that we praise for Madrimov. I think sometimes he breaks his stance, and I think Crawford will make him pay for that, and I can see him breaking him down that way. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if he nailed him on the counter as well, like Darren was saying, setting a trap and bringing him onto one. Yeah, I do fancy Terence Crawford probably by a late stoppage as well.
So Terence Crawford, clean sweep. Riyadh season, but in LA. And I think it's important, isn't it, that we do take Riyadh season abroad. We are going to do something at Wembley, LA. It's good to see it happening abroad.
Just speaking from an American perspective, it's really important to have a fight in LA because these cards that have been over here in Riyadh, they've been phenomenal. How often do you have world championship fights like Ray Ford, who just headlined his last fight in a tremendous fight as one of the opening bouts of a card? The depth of these fights has just been incredible. The timing is just the issue, right? If you're doing fights at primetime UK and a little bit later over here in Riyadh, you're getting it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, East Coast time, 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the US. And the reality is, there's just not a lot of people indoors at that point, watching some of these. Not nearly as many should be, given the quality of these fights. So I think it's going to be great to have this fight in LA, prime time in LA, prime time in New York. The kind of exposure this card is going to get, I think, is really going to introduce the U.S. audience to what these fight cards are.
Chris, thank you very much. Darren, appreciate it. Joe, can't wait to see you back in the ring. Any clues as to who you're going to?
Nothing, patience.
Stop it, don't you? Yeah, you know. Ben, appreciate it as well. Fantastic card, August 3rd in LA, headlined by the man looking to become a full-weight world champion, Terence Crawford, as he bids, I think, to chase down Canelo, but he has to get the job done against Israil Madrimov before then.